Hi, this is Joe from Vanta. In today's digital world, compliance regulations are changing constantly, and earning customer trust has never mattered more. Vanta helps companies get compliant fast and stay secure with the most advanced AI, automation, and continuous monitoring out there. So whether you're a startup going for your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or a growing enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta makes it quick, easy, and scalable. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. Get started at Vanta.com.
Popeyes Scary Good new Freddy Fazbear box that's garlic palm tenders and cheesy bites with marinara sauce. Try it before it's too late. And see Five Nights at Freddy's 2, only in theaters. Love that chicken from Popeyes. Limited time at participating U.S. restaurants.
If we knew more about our sleep, what would we do differently? Would we go to bed at a consistent time or take steps to reduce interruptions to our sleep? With the all-new Sleep Score, Apple Watch measures your bedtime consistency, interruptions, and sleep duration. Then, every morning it combines these factors into an easy-to-understand score from 1 to 100. So you'll know how to take the quality of your sleep from good to excellent. Introducing the new Sleep Score on Apple Watch. iPhone 11 or later required.
It was a 28-point peace plan that was immediately dismissed as unworkable, as dictated by Vladimir Putin, and then one that Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelenskyy suddenly said, well, maybe we can work something out here after all. And the headlines and challenges around trying to end the war between Russia and Ukraine just continue. Hello, and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host, and today we explore the quagmire on the Donbass. While we have a backdrop of a peace plan discussion taking place, there's also attacks by Russia. They're carrying out cyber and hard attacks, drones you might say, against NATO allies such as Poland, where a train line was sabotaged, or Latvia, where drones have been hitting regularly. You have the offices of Andriy Yermak, chief of staff to Zelensky, being raided in a corruption scandal, and Putin saying he still wants to meet with Donald Trump in Budapest. Well, to help us all figure this out, Matthew Bondy is a foreign policy expert with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute who follows the situation in Ukraine closely and will attempt to help make sense of it all. Matt, thanks for the time.
Hey, Brian. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Help us figure out, where did this 28-point peace plan come from? Because it's been described as Donald Trump's peace plan, and then it was, well, no, it's not really Trump's peace plan. It was people around him. Where did this come about, and does it belong to Donald Trump or someone else? Is this a Putin-dictated plan?
Well, it sure looks like a Putin-dictated plan. When you look at the contents of it, it reads a little bit like a fascist fever dream. I mean, it compels Ukraine to limit the size of its armed forces to 600,000, which sounds like a lot, but it's not in that neighborhood. It gives Russia bonus lands that it hasn't even won by force of arms in the conflict, which is something that one struggles to understand. And it goes back to the precedent that got us here in the first place, which is very weak, non-prescriptive security guarantees. So you'll recall the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, where the U.S., the U.K., and Russia agreed that Ukraine was going to be independent, it was going to be free, and that Western powers would provide security support should Ukraine ever be violated by force of arms. And that was no better than the paper it was written on. So this goes back to a horrible precedent of weak security guarantees. It keeps Ukraine out of NATO forever, which is not something one does to a sovereign country. And it rewards Russian aggression. This is dangerous, dangerous stuff. It's going to make the world less safe if this plan goes forward as proposed by Trump. In terms of its origin, Brian, I think it's going to take a lot of years and a lot of books to figure out exactly whose ideas went into each point. But I think Trump thinks that he is on a roll right now, following the Middle East peace plan. And yeah, it looks to me like he wants to do another one just like the other one.
Okay, but at some point, Zelensky looked and said, I can work with this, or at least some of it. Now, it's changed dramatically. It's gone from 28. The most recent I heard was 19, and maybe it's expanded or contracted since then. What is it that Zelensky is looking at in this plan that makes him say, all right, let's talk?
I think that if I put myself in Zelensky's shoes and I look at the situation in Ukraine right now, The original peace plan was so horrifically bad, but Ukraine has so little leverage with the United States continuing to court Vladimir Putin in a way that is inconsistent with U.S. foreign policy over the long term. So I think Zelensky's looking at the hand he has. It's a bad hand. It's a really tough hand, and the strategy he's using would be something you might refer to as embrace and contain. The United States is the only game in town in terms of ability to actually drive security and economic outcomes for Ukraine in the short term. And if you don't get in the room with the United States and talk about where the United States is looking to go, then you just have no leverage to move forward. So embracing the United States and its objectives in principle, while containing the worst elements and trying to improve them. That's the name of the game for Zelensky.
In terms of land being swapped out, I've heard Mark Carney, I've heard the European leaders say we can't reward Russia, borders shouldn't change due to war. Well, borders have always changed due to war. That's
Sure.
just a matter of fact throughout the centuries. Um, but what I find strange, especially coming from the Europeans more than Canadians, is that they're not willing to go in and help Ukraine fight the war. In my view, they're not even willing to properly fund Ukraine to have a shot at winning this war. And yet they're
Yeah.
demanding that the war not end. So help me figure that out. And this is not me saying, well, Russia took that land, so they get to keep it. But it's Russia won't give up that land that they have taken by military force. They're refusing to give
Yeah.
that up. The Europeans are refusing to fight to get it back. But they're telling Ukraine, you just keep sitting there like a malnourished child fighting this bear that has no end of people to put on the front line, whether it's their own or North
Yeah.
Koreans or who knows.
Mhm. Yeah, you're right. I mean, over the centuries, war does change borders, and we should still aspire to better. And since World War II and the establishment of the UN and kind of the post-war architecture, the world's actually done a pretty decent job at living up to the aspiration of not moving borders by force of arms. Tons of exceptions, but in general, this has been a norm, and it is a cornerstone norm of international relations that is being so flagrantly violated. And so there is a huge concern about that. In terms of what Europe can really do, there are steps that it can take and that it should take. Europe itself is sitting on about 200 billion with a B in frozen Russian assets, and there's lots of good methodologies for getting that money out the door to support the Ukrainian defense industrial base, give it the weapons it needs to at least
Well,
hold
I,
Russia
I, I'm,
off
I'm
while
glad you
they
I'm
negotiate
glad
a
you raised
better
this, Matt.
system. Yeah.
I'm glad you raised this because Bill Browder has
Yeah.
been talking about this for several years now. I've talked to him about it when he's visited here in Toronto. He described how Canada, with the Magnitsky Act, has the ability to seize those assets and turn them over to Ukraine. That
That's right.
Chrystia Freeland, when she was still finance minister, talked about how I think it's about 40, $50 million worth of assets, could be more, that were seized here in Canada that we could have turned over. Not only have the Europeans not done that, but we haven't done that. We've talked loudly and proudly about it, but we haven't done it. Why hasn't that happened? I saw one report in Politico that Belgian leadership keeps trying to block this from happening with the Europeans.
hmm
But as Canada, we could have acted on our own and helped fund the war with Russian assets, and that would have helped deal with those people who say, well, we shouldn't be spending our own tax dollars on it. It's hard to say, well, we
Yeah.
shouldn't give Vladimir Putin's money to them.
Absolutely. We should have, and it's the same with the Europeans right now. To put the question you asked about why has this not been done in the most favorable, plausible light, you might say that Europe and Canada are waiting for the terms of an agreement to use that as a chip for desired outcomes for Ukraine's benefit. Put those chips on the table from Europe and from Canada to say to the United States, listen, we want to get this money out the door to support Ukraine. This is money the United States, don't have to spend. Give us some leverage and latitude at the negotiating table. Let us get to a better outcome than what you're proposing, Mr. President. But I see weakness and I see hesitation, and that is what Vladimir Putin preys on.
Well, when I look at the fact that we wouldn't properly arm Ukraine and that we wouldn't properly fund them, to me that's weakness on the part of the West. We are asking them to win a war against a much larger adversary, and
Mhm.
look, they've done admirable in holding Russia to where they have. At the
Mhm.
beginning, it
Mhm.
was widely predicted the war would be over quickly. They have done well, but you can't say they're winning the war. Not saying they're losing it, but they're not winning
Yeah.
either. And
No,
I
no, they're
don't
not.
think that dis- despite our rhetoric, we have not helped them the way that we could have or should have.
Yeah. Yeah. Neither side can win the war, so to speak. Vladimir Putin thought that he would be able to take Kyiv and and Ukraine would fall in weeks. And Ukraine fought like hell. And so, Putin can't get his win that he defined, which is to swallow and destroy Ukraine. Ukraine can't win this war in the sense of, at least with the weapon systems and the support available, they can't take back all of their territory, including the Crimea. I maintain that should still be the objective. And here's why. Like, if you look at um, what support for Ukraine is actually costing the United States, for example, it's about 4% of their annual military spending that's going to Ukraine. And that includes non-military items as well, like aid and support for civilian infrastructure. So we're talking 4% of an already somewhat small U.S. defense budget compared to Cold War numbers. For 4%, let's say you move it to 5 or 6% so that you can actually send Ukraine what it needs to win battles. So like ATACMS, Tomahawk missiles, etc. For like 5 or 6% of annual military spending, Ukraine can disarm Russia for a generation. That is a good deal. The realists, the so-called realists who are cynical about Ukraine having a bright and Western and allied future, they're missing the point. For a very reasonable investment, the United States and its allies could keep Ukraine in the fight, help it go on the offensive by doubling down on support for that nation that will unilaterally, even if they don't win all of their land back, they will disarm this fascist regime for a generation. And that's a great deal. They should be rewarded, not scolded for that. And so I thank the Trump administration for all the great work it's done on foreign policy. And I think they've done some great stuff, like checking Iran and moving toward peace in the Middle East. They're backwards on this one.
There's a lot of domestic politics going on in the United States, and I think that's going to flare up with the, well, at this point, not arrest, but the raid of the office of Zelensky's chief of staff, Andrei Yermak. We've been seeing Ukraine
Mhm.
play out in American domestic politics going back to the first Trump administration, or even
Mhm.
before that, with, um, you know, some would say going back to the Russia hoax. All of this plays in, and there's a lot of distrust on the American right about Ukraine. So how does this uh, raid of the office? I believe there's 7 or 8 people already facing charges in this current corruption scandal that's taken in Zelensky's chief of staff. Um, how does that play out in domestic policies for the United States to do what you're talking about? Because people would
Yeah.
just say, "Yeah, but they're just skimming millions from us. Why would we keep funding them?" And I can tell you, that was part of the reason that Stephen Harper pulled out of Afghanistan when he did, is that
Mm.
Canada was sending a lot of money, and he didn't feel that an awful lot of it was going to the Afghan people, that it was going
Mm.
to arrive at a situation that we needed. It was being skimmed by warlords and officials, and he just said, "Okay, enough."
Yeah. Yeah. I think the corruption investigation, that's obviously going to be catnip to the pro-Russia crowd. And that's just politics. I think where we need to go on it is say yes and. So corruption is always bad. That's true. Um, Ukraine is in the middle of a war and it's a fledgling democracy. And so I think we have to have uh, a little bit of a pain tolerance for things not being super smooth and there being certain levels of corruption, which exist in all countries. So we can't give it a free pass. We also have to focus on the big picture. Leadership is about keeping the main thing the main thing. The main thing is international peace and security and a world where freedom can flourish through self-determination. So we have to, make sure that the corruption gets attacked, while at the same time keeping focus on the main thing, which is international peace and security and freedom. And I'm confident that if the United States would really put uh, its foot down, it could achieve this. Look at what, for example, Brian, look at what they're doing in Israel. What they're doing, what they've done in Israel and the peace plan, it is a form of imperialism. And I'll tell you what, one of the most insightful books on international relations over the last
You,
few
you're
decades was
you're
written
saying
by
that Trump. Hold on, Matt. Just to be clear, you're
yeah,
saying that Trump's peace plan in the Middle East is a form of imperialism?
yeah, it is. It is. So there's a great book called Empire Light by none other than Michael Ignatieff, former liberal leader. And he argues that there are some responsibilities, some goals in international relations that are uniquely suited to a form of imperialism because it requires a great power to have freedom of action to control a very complex situation. And so if you look at what happened in the peace plan, the United States just dictated the terms to everybody. Yes, there were some negotiations with Qatar. Israel was involved. Jared Kushner, led extensive talks. At the end of the day, though, this was a U.S. imposed peace plan, not unlike how the U.S. imposed on Germany and Japan after World War II what the terms of uh, their polity going forward were going to look like. So, what happened in Israel with the peace plan is the U.S. putting its foot down, saying this is how it's going to be. And you know what? It's gone over with the Arabs, and there's no path, at least in the short term, to a state of Palestine. You can get big things done if you put your foot down as the world's superpower. And the US can do in Ukraine what it did in Israel, and it's not doing it. It's caving to Russian aggression, and it's wrongheaded.
I hear what you're saying, Matt, about the United States leaning on Israel, but Israel's not Russia. And Russia isn't what it was before in the USSR, where it was a co-competing superpower with the United States. It's not that,
Mhm.
but it is still a fairly big and powerful country. There have been attempts by President Trump to lean on Putin. I know that his critics will say that he is Putin's puppet. Um, I think the attempt to have them meet in Alaska, I think the attempt to have them meet in Budapest and then cancel, I think he is trying to figure out what to do, but fundamentally, I'm not sure that Putin can be trusted. How does he attempt to do the same thing he did with Israel with Vladimir Putin in Russia?
Mhm. The balance of power, the imbalance of power between the likes of the United States and the Russian Federation is gaping. So we have this mental image of Russia as this hulking leviathan, powerful nation. When you actually look under the hood at Russia, you're talking about an economy that's only a little bit bigger than Canada's, that is taking the whole world hostage, and they have a horrible standard of living. Their military is incredibly degraded following Ukraine's valiant efforts to defend itself. The reason Russia seems to have a good hand is because everybody seems to think Russia has a good hand, but they don't. And if the United States were to uh, send the quantity and quality of military hardware support that Ukraine needs, um, there is no question that Russia can be halted in its tracks and effectively defanged for a generation. They're not that powerful. They are just vicious, and they seem to have the ear of the president. And if you look at the ink on the initial plan for peace in Ukraine, it reads as though Russia wrote it. And we give Russia and Vladimir Putin way too much credit and way too much latitude. If the United States wanted to put its foot down, this war could be over like the Trump administration says it could be, and it could be done on terms favorable to Ukraine. The fact that the United States is giving Russia so much leash to conduct such vile operations, whether it's military or stealing children en masse, it's a stain on the U.S. foreign policy record.
Well, there was a point where Trump did threaten to send tomahawks, and that clearly got Putin's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Russia is vulnerable. They are not that strong. They're just picking on the weak kid in the class. But the weak kid is turning out to be a bit of a hero here, despite his modest size. So, you made the point earlier. I want to go back to, why have Europe and Canada not done more? We say we're great friends of Ukraine. Ukraine needs all its territory back. Why have we not done more? And I think a lot of that comes back to the role of NATO. If you look actually at the game tape of how Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has talked about Ukraine, he has not ruled out the United States being comfortable in principle with a multinational reassurance force being in Ukraine following a peace establishment to act as a deterrent against Russian foreign continued military intervention. What he has said is that it could not be done under the aegis of NATO, because as we know, under the aegis of NATO's Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, and the United States has no interest in involving itself in a European land war. So you could see, as part of the ongoing negotiations that are happening right now, you could see Canada and Europe say, listen, we are each going to be contributing divisions, brigades, whatever. The moment there is a peace plan that is acceptable to Ukraine and it gets inked by Russia and the US, we, the powers of Canada and Europe, are moving our troops and material into Ukraine, inside Ukraine, with their blessing and support to act as a deterrent. And the terms would be that is a non-NATO deployment. So that's one of the key things I'm looking for in this negotiation.
All right, let's take a break right there. And when we come back, we'll talk more about what Canada can and can't do militarily and on other fronts to help Ukraine. Back in moments.
Say hello to the all-new Alexa Plus and see how Alexa can do so much more for you. Need tickets to see your favorite artist? Craving your comfort restaurant? Just sit back, relax, and talk naturally. Alexa's on it. It learns your style, anticipates what's next, and makes it happen across Echo, Fire TV, and more. Learn more at amazon.com/new Alexa.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. Jay Kelly, the new film from Academy Award nominee Noah Baumbach. George Clooney stars as an actor confronting his past and present on a journey of self-discovery, alongside Adam Sandler as his devoted manager. Critics are calling it a declaration of love to the chaotic art of filmmaking, with the Wall Street Journal praising it as a transcendent comedy drama. Watch Jay Kelly December 5th, only on Netflix.
This episode is brought to you by Blink. Blink Friday starts now with up to 65% off Blink Smart Security. Check on your pets all season long with new Blink Mini 2K Plus cameras. See your gifts arrive in head-to-toe view with Blink Video Doorbell. Ready to use right out of the box. Just unwrap Blink and go. From pet parents to jet setters to busy families, Blink Friday deals have your holidays covered. Shop now at amazon.com/blink.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
So, Matt, before the break, you were talking about the fact that Canadian troops could end up there. And I'm going to say this as a longtime supporter of the Canadian Armed Forces, many friends and family members there. a very short stint, had a cup of coffee as a reservist, been around the military my whole life. So I say that as someone that supports it. There's not a lot that we can do right now. Our biggest deployment at the moment is Operation Reassurance in Latvia. And that is a strain for us using just 2,000 troops. And they're in Latvia because Latvia is a NATO member. And we all believe that Putin, if allowed to take over Ukraine, would then turn towards Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, etc. He wants the USSR band back if he can get it. So what can we properly do militarily to assist Ukraine, either to win the war or to secure the peace, when we have allowed ourselves to become so weak, so depressingly weak?
Yeah, Canada has this tradition of completely disarming itself between major conflicts. And it's a lesson we just refuse to learn, Brian. Yeah, as a former Army reservist as well, I mean, it drives me nuts. In terms of what Canada can do for Ukraine, I mean, you mentioned that Op Reassurance features about 2,000 men and their material. Even the
Some of
UK,
whom had to buy their own helmets.
I know, what a travesty. So Canada struggles to deploy a full fanged brigade group, and that's a problem. Even the United Kingdom would struggle to field more than a couple of brigades, per comments from some of its brass recently. So you are very right to point out that the West has dug itself a hole that it needs to dig itself out of, from the ability to deploy, deter, and defend its interests and allies. And so the only thing we can do about that right now, it's like the saying, best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, second best time is today. All we can do is focus on the future. We can focus on the major investments that, to its credit, the Carney government has put on the table for recruiting and re-equipping and rearming the Canadian military. That's what we can do for the medium and long term. What we can do right now is we can focus on things like deploying frozen Russian assets, like working with our European partners to try and tip the scales in Ukraine's favor on peace settlements. And going forward, the West has to ask itself if it actually is prepared to defend its civilization. Really, that's what it comes down to, I think. If think of all the wealth in Europe, Canada, and the United States, and all of mainland Europe is being held hostage by one fascist thug with an economy just barely bigger than Canada's. That's how bad it's gotten, to your point. So at some point, the West has to decide if it wants to defend its civilization or not. And if it does, I think they need to take a serious look, all the powers in the West, apparently without the United States, at least for now, at how can we deploy men and material into Ukraine so that if they are attacked again, which it is very likely to be the case, if the peace plan gets implemented the way it's currently designed. So when Russia reinvades, if they're given favorable quote unquote peace terms, which is really just a ceasefire to rearm themselves, what are we going to do about it? And if we're not prepared to defend our democratic friends and allies, that is a future that looks very, very dim.
Well, we love to talk a big game about it. We talk about how Canada has the largest Ukrainian diaspora and we are such great friends. And then I'll tell you what we've sent them militarily. We sent them gender-based analysis advisors.
I know.
I wish that was a joke. I wish that was satire. But the Canadian Armed Forces sent gender advisors to Ukraine to perform gender-based plus analysis of things like minesweeping and building their military.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, when someone's shooting at you, that's not what you need. I know there have been other pieces of material. Some of it took far too long. Some of it had to be dragged out of them. I still don't know if the shells at CFB Dundurn that the Ukrainians were begging us for were ever shipped over or not. They said, send us what you have and we'll use what is functional. But we have continually talked bigger than we've been able to deliver. And sadly that wasn't the case. When Germany needed a peace force, a peace stabilization force, we easily had thousands, but it would have been over 10,000 troops at one point in West
Mhm,
Germany.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
and that was in peacetime. That was during the Cold War.
yeah. Canada has become, on military matters, with very few exceptions, fundamentally unserious as a power. To your point about sending gender advisors to like a hot conflict, like it's embarrassing. But we do have a way forward. We do have massive investments that, to its credit, the Carney government's put on the table. It's going to take a while to get there, and this is a decades-long bipartisan failure on Canada's part. And it's one we did before World War One. We did it before World War Two. We did it. Uh, we consistently disarm ourselves between major conflicts. Now we need to really learn that lesson, not waste this crisis in terms of it being a hinge moment for Canada's posture on the world stage, because we need to do so much better.
Let's talk about the land in the peace plan. Um, you mentioned that there are areas that the Russians don't even have, that the peace plan would um, suggest that Ukraine give up. There
Yeah.
are areas that Russia has seized that they clearly do not want to return. But you suggested that we go all the way back to having Crimea as part of Ukraine. I don't think it ever should have left, but
Hmm.
we didn't even raise a voice, never mind a gun, to stop that.
Hmm.
Stephen Harper's the closest, I guess, we had with telling off Putin in,
Yeah.
I think it was Australia. Uh, I get the concern on lands Russia doesn't have. How does Ukraine get back lands that Russia does have, given the current situation, whether it's Donetsk or Kherson?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
before we even get to Crimea, how do you get those lands back?
I would say two things. Just for context, the the land components of the peace plan are so bad that it contemplates Russia, quote unquote, not preventing Ukraine from using the critical inland Dnieper River to move goods, services, and people um, through its supply chains and its international trade routes. We're talking about an inland major um, geoeconomic asset that is Ukrainian, and the quote unquote peace plan says Russia will please allow Ukraine to use Ukraine's river to do Ukrainian things. It's the land elements of the proposed peace plan are completely out of control, and that is the keynote example. In terms of mechanically how to retake those lands, honestly, you wonder how possible it is to retake all that control. If you're looking at this, like we've talked about, aspirationally, like we should be a world, that works according to the rule of law. We should have borders determined not by armed conflict. With the situation we have in eastern Ukraine right now, open question about how much of that can be retaken by force of arms in light of how tightly Russia is dug in. I would answer your question not from a military perspective, but from a political perspective. What we don't want to do is we don't want to negotiate against ourselves and our allies by saying, "Oh, those lands are written off now." As part of the um, settlement, we have to go in to any peace process, which I don't think should be on the table right now. I think we should be arming Ukraine to the teeth and letting them disarm Russia for a generation. But if we're going to have peace talks, the lands currently in question represent negotiating against Ukraine and against Western principles of self-determination. So militarily, how do you get those lands back? I don't know. I do know that Ukraine would fight like hell for them if they had the weapon systems that they needed. And that would be good enough for now to continue degrading Russia, to tip the balance of influence in favor of Ukraine and the West, and not in Russia's favor.
Are these oil or mineral rich lands? Is that what's driving Putin to want them, or is it just rapacious greed for land and as I said earlier, putting the USSR band back together.
Yeah, I would say yes to your question of whether they're mineral rich or it's just rapacious greed. There are meaningful deposits of rare earth in eastern Ukraine, which is important for both military and non-military economic development and supply chains. And you saw that maybe 6 months ago now, Trump tried to make a deal with Zelensky to deliver more military support and economic development support in exchange for vast mineral resources in Ukraine. So that's definitely a feature animating some of this. You see this in Europe, whereas you see a lot of equivalent situations in Africa over petrol. Oil-rich regions are always kind of at war. So it's an element here for sure. And it's an element that the United States has bellied up to the trough on that too, in a way that, happens commonly in international relations, but was done in a particularly flagrant and undignified way when we're talking about a strategic partner and Western ally like Ukraine.
Well, he essentially said, we'll help you, but we'll get the deposits afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even the terms of a military package of the likes I would like to see, which is very large, robust, gives Ukraine the opportunity to contemplate going back on the offensive in those eastern regions. There's every opportunity for that to be incredibly beneficial for the United States, where essentially you're lending / giving money to Ukraine to buy predominantly U.S. military hardware. And so that is positive for the U.S. industrial base. It's in the United States' self-interest. It's in the interest of Ukraine. It's going to take a while, Brian, but we're going to figure out eventually why, under the Trump administration, U.S. has gone so pro-Russia. And I suspect, it's a combination of, really liking the look of autocracy, really liking the look of, the strongman look, and maybe other nefarious things. But, there hasn't really been anything meaningfully proven about Trump and Russia. But this is also fundamentally pro-Russian, the way that the peace plan has set the table for this discussion, that I would propose it needs to be completely scuttled.
Look, not to defend Trump, but he wears a lot of stuff with Russia.
Yep.
Europe is much closer to this, and they won't even give up European oil and gas to help Ukraine. And Canada refused to sell our own liquefied natural gas to help get people off of Russian oil and gas. So, it can be a bit rich for any of us to say, well, he's obviously pro-Russian. If you're buying Russian oil and gas, you're funding the war. And the Europeans and others who've spoken up about this have refused to wean themselves off of that. We could have helped, and we chose not to. I think there's just so much hypocrisy. It angers me tremendously.
There is a lot
the
of
way
hypocrisy.
The world has responded to Ukraine, with a lot of great words and a lot of bad action. How much of this you were talking about the military industrial base in the United States? A lot of this war is being fought with drones, but I don't think the war can be won with drones, though. But this war will be studied because of its use of drones. This war will be studied for years to come.
Yeah, that's another thing that Ukraine represents, is what you might call a sandbox for technological development of defense systems. The quick iterations and the availability of funds to be pushed down to combatant commands, so that they can iterate quickly and make purchases quickly, has been a real lesson for the entire West. And I've got a piece coming up in the Jerusalem Post actually soon about how Canada can learn from some of its great allies a lot of lessons about how to effectively use all this new money that Mr. Carney's pushed down. And one of the theaters it can learn from is Ukraine, how quickly the iteration happens on defense tech development and how low you have to push the money down the chain of command to enable purchasing in real time. It's pretty phenomenal what's happening in Ukraine right now, just from a defense technology perspective.
So you're having junior officers or NCOs making purchase orders? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know about junior officers and NCOs, but you do have junior officers and NCOs participating in the adoption and piloting of technologies and informing decisions at a combatant commander level. So we're talking, maybe brigade level, where there is money available for purchasing technologies much lower down the chain of command, so that those folks who are enabled with this financing to buy the resources are actually connected with the troops who are iterating on the technology in real time in theater. It's just a rapid way to iterate on defense tech, and what's happening in Ukraine is pretty unparalleled.
You've made clear that you would prefer to see Ukraine be armed to the teeth. Do you see anything on the horizon that makes you think someone will go that route, or are we stumbling towards a bad peace deal and trying to make it into a palatable one?
I think the latter, Brian. I think the West will not be on its front foot militarily for another decade. It takes a long time to build the defense industrial conditions to produce war-winning hardware at scale. I think we've got a bad peace deal on the table. I think Ukraine appears resigned to try and make it a less bad peace deal. And it appears to me, I wish I didn't think this, but it appears to me that we're going back to a Budapest memorandum style of security guarantee that will enable Russia to take a breath, regroup, rearm, and come back at Ukraine. That is what this looks like to me right now, and it's unnecessary, unwise, and I think the most likely scenario.
Well, I've been hoping for a long time that Vladimir Putin would simply go away. That hasn't worked out. And I was hoping that long before he started this war, before he took Crimea without so much as a shot being fired. So I can hope it as much as I want. It won't make it come true. Matt, thanks for the conversation today.
Hey, thank you, Brian.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast, and my name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue, theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please help us out by hitting subscribe, leaving us a review, or telling your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I Promised You. 2 years later, he was still opposition leader, and he lost again to the Pearson Liberals. Despite this, Diefenbaker doesn't resign as leader of the Progressive Conservatives, which put the party in an awkward situation that hasn't really happened before. The typical rules of a Canadian political party were that you stayed leader until you died or resigned. And if you lost twice in a row, you were supposed to do the honorable thing and step aside. But Diefenbaker just didn't, prompting the party to take the unprecedented step of forcing a party convention in Toronto for the singular purpose of crowbarring Diefenbaker out of the leadership. Diefenbaker shows up, pretends everything is fine, and gives a finger-wagging speech chastising his fellow party members for their disloyalty.
I followed this party when I didn't agree with policies. And I gave loyalty to leader after leader, because I believe that there is no other way.
He's politely cheered by the assembled Conservatives and then abjectly humiliated in their subsequent leadership vote. On the first ballot, Diefenbaker gets a distant 5th place, and even then he refuses to admit defeat. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.